I'm just about to purchase my 8th investment property, and the portfolio is now worth $5 million. The wildest part, none of them are in my name. Now, the portfolio is going to cost me roughly $100,000 a year to hold, and I'm about to buy 3 more investment properties. So how does that even work, and why did my dad buy a random shitbox? Today, I'm pulling back the curtain. I'll walk you through how I went from buying 2 absolute dud apartments to building a multi-million-dollar portfolio with a borrowing strategy that allows me to keep buying, even when most people would have tapped out. This video isn't some flex about owning property, especially once you hear how my dad accidentally bought a house at auction without my consent. That actually happened. But I'm sharing it because it shows how far I've come. I'll walk you through the dumb mistakes I made early on, the turning point where things started to work, and the borrowing strategy I use today to grow without getting stuck. The truth is, it's not just about my income or saving a massive deposit. If you've got the right structure, the right team, and the right assets, you can keep building. This is how I've done it, not theory. These are real numbers, real properties, and a few brutal lessons along the way. So let me take you back to the start. It didn't begin with strategy. It started with me and my brother buying an apartment in the same complex in Brunswick. We were 18, we had no plan, we had no research. We just thought we were killing it because the price had gone up by $20,000 in a couple of years after we bought the property. Our mum was our unofficial buyer's agent. She never bought an investment property in her life. She told us to go again, and so we bought a second property in the same complex. So no surprise, they both turned out to be terrible assets. They were tiny apartments on a main road in a complex of 40-something units. Rents were barely covering anything, and the levies were pretty ridiculous. I remember one year my brother got hit with like an $8,000 levy because, I don't know, a letterbox fell over or some shit. Anyway, we ended up selling both. One made 10 grand over 8 years, 10 grand growth. The other we sold for less than what we paid, which is a nice way of saying, yeah, cool loss. The third property, that's when my dad comes into the party, and that's where this story came in. So, it was a random Saturday. It was myself, it was Frank, it was my brother, my sister. And we planned out that day to go out to a whole bunch of auctions because I was ready to buy my next property. Now, this was my 3rd asset. Now, just before we left, we started getting into the car. It was a rainy day. I remember my dad going, "Where are you guys off to?" And we went, "Oh, we're taking off to some auctions." And he went, "Cool, I'll come along." We rocked up to the property. The property was an absolute mess, what I like to call a shithole. Sinking floors, mold, the works. We walked out of the property, all stood under the same umbrella, talking about how bad the property was. We were looking at our phones at, where the next auction was for that particular day, and we're saying, "Oh, I don't even think this property is going to sell." The auction started, no one bidded. We looked at each other, having a bit of a laugh, not taking it serious. Next thing we knew, the auctioneer went going once, going twice, going 3 times. My dad, for whatever reason, thought it was the right decision to pop his hand up. The gentleman, the auctioneer, looked at my dad and said, going once, going twice for $600,000, sold. We had just bought the property for $600,000. And from that point, that property was a complete and utter nightmare. We recently sold that asset, had a growth rate of less than 4%, and that property specifically actually put me backwards. So that 3rd property was really the catalyst for me to actually realise that something seriously had to change. And I was lucky because Mr. Frank, my now business partner, but best friend of the last 10 years, he had a very, very similar experience. And we both went through really horrible things in property at the exact same time, 2017, 2018. The next 3 to 4 years, we did nothing but property. We read every single book, every single strategy. We spoke to every single guru in the space. And that's when we actually decided to start the company that we now have today, Fresh Start Advisory. However, more so from a personal perspective, I realized that, holy shit, if I'm going to reach the goals that I want to reach, I need to take property serious. And that's what led me to my next property purchase, which occurred in 2021. And I want to just highlight the differences between how this property kind of mapped out and how my first 3 properties mapped out and what the difference was. 2021, what was the difference? Well, I ended up purchasing an asset in Bundaberg. Now, we'd purchased already properties for our clients in that particular region. That property, what was the difference in how we kind of attacked it? 1, complete research. Research was all backed on data, had nothing to do with where was the property actually located compared to where I lived. So that was the first thing. Backed by research, purchased by a buyer's agent. Big one. 2, we had to map out a plan. Now, the first thing that we did when we started Fresh Start Advisory is we built out our own mapping tool. It was essentially how to go from where you are to where you want to go. This asset that we purchased, the Bundaberg asset that we purchased for myself, it all tied into the plan. Now, the plan was $200,000 of passive income. That is still my goal today. I'll touch on that specifically in just a sec. But the asset was worked on right on the plan. And then the third and most important thing, I believe, is we had the team around us. We had a buyer's agent, which is obviously us, but we also had a rock solid broker who understood entities. This asset was not purchased in my personal name, the first property that I ever did that in. We also had an accountant who also understood entities, right? So you're having a broker, an accountant, a buyer's agent, all in your corner, all going towards the same goal. That is how this asset went from a $412,000 property in 2021 to now it's currently worth $900,000 in just 4 years. So how do I keep buying properties even when the portfolio is going to be costing me $100,000 a year to hold? Unfortunately, that cash cow I bought off the local farmer turned out to be a regular cow. So now I need a solid strategy instead. So first things first, obviously it is reliant on my income. I think let's not beat around the bush. My income every single year has gone up, and my suggestion for everyone is that should also be the number one goal. You get your income up and up and up so that you can borrow more. However, it is not all tied just to your income. Let me break down exactly the 4 steps that I use to be able to continue to borrow. First thing, you need to set a very clear goal and then most importantly, stick to it. Now, since 2020, I've had a goal to have a portfolio which produces me $200,000 of net passive income. But if I'm being honest with myself and I'm being honest with you, I've kind of always shifted this goal. Now, internally, my team and my CFO, who manages my entire property portfolio, he knows that that goal is shifters, and sometimes it's 250 and sometimes it's 200. It was only at this year, 2025, at Frank's Bucks party, actually. My CFO, who's also my very, very, very close friend, and we went for a morning run. We went for a 10-kilometre morning run on the Saturday of the Bucks party. And after that, we went for a walk along the beach. And it was then when it actually hit me that having the $200,000 goal and sticking to it is so, so powerful. We went back and forth, and Sebastian, who's got little children, I'm yet to have children yet, but I will be in the next couple of years, he essentially drilled me. He essentially said, Adrian, think about it in 5 years' time. If you could sit there and go, my portfolio is producing me $200,000, regardless what happens with the business, regardless what happens with my health, regardless what happens in the world, your family, Christina, your kids are going to be 100% fine. That is when I decided to say, yep, let's go 100% to the $200,000 goal. And since then, 5 months ago, every decision that I've made regarding my property portfolio has been around the goal of hitting $200,000 of passive income in 5 years. Number 2, recycle equity. Most people think you need to save a new deposit every time you buy. What's cool is I haven't needed to save for one in years. Most of my recent purchases have been 100% finance. What does that mean? Let's say you buy a property for $400,000. Over time, it grows to $600,000. That gives you $200,000 in equity. You might pull out $100,000 and use that as a deposit on your next purchase. So even though the bank is lending you the full amount, it's backed by equity you've unlocked and not money you've saved from scratch. So take that duplex I bought for $412,000 in Bundaberg. It's now worth close to $900,000. Rents have gone from $580 to $960. I've pulled equity out of that property 4 times and used it to buy 3 more properties. It's pretty awesome how one good property can fund your next 3. But only if you've structured right, which leads me into the next bit. Number 3, use the right entity. At the start, I bought everything in my personal name. That's what most people do, and I was no different. Unfortunately, it didn't scale because every time you buy under your own name, it adds to your personal borrowing capacity. The banks look at you like a bartender at 3 a.m, no more. they say. But instead of gin and tonics, they mean debt. Now that happened to me pretty quickly, not the gin and tonics part, the debt ceiling. By the time I was 4 or 5 properties in, I was tapped out. So when I said, so if I wanted to buy a family home, the banks would basically say, too bad. That's why I switched to buying through trusts and companies. A trust or a company is a separate legal entity, similar to something like a business. It has its own ABN, tax file number, bank account. It can borrow money separately from you, even if you're already maxed out personally. So when I buy through a trust or a company, the debt sits within the trust or company, not me, which lets me keep acquiring without maxing out my personal borrowing capacity. The downside to buying in a trust or company is that they're not the easiest to set up. They have ongoing costs, and you'll obviously need a professional to help you set it all up and maintain. But, and it's a big but, if you don't set up a trust or a company from day one, it's potentially going to hurt you later down in the track, because transferring a property from your personal name into a trust later on means you'll cop stamp duty and a bunch of other costs. It's basically like selling it to yourself, which is the exact reason why I was forced to essentially sell my 3 poor performing assets when the time was right. Number 4, rely on the team. Every time I look at a property, I speak to 3 people: my broker, my accountant, and my CFO. They know the plan, they know the numbers, and they love their spreadsheets. And I love them too, actually. However, I don't manage the properties. I don't chase rents. I probably should, but don't even know who my property managers are. But that's what's awesome about having a great team behind that know what your goals are. Now, this hands-off approach isn't for everyone. If you're someone who loves being hands-on, you might get a better outcome than me. There are some investors out there who know every cent that goes in and out of their portfolio. I have massive respect for that. But for me, my main focus is running my business, and that's where I choose to put my time and energy. For me, that's what makes the most sense for my life right now. So as long as what I'm doing is getting me closer to that $200,000 passive income, then I'm happy. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to work for myself. Right now, the portfolio is sitting at around $5 million. And as I mentioned to you, by the end of the year, the portfolio is going to be costing me about $100,000. So I'm just about to buy 1 more property. I'll buy another 2 more investment properties. And when the portfolio gets to $6 million, that is when we have decided to essentially shift the strategy. And this is what I'm going to be doing next. Once the portfolio hits around $6 million, I want to stop growing, go out for a really nice steak dinner and start consolidating. That means 2 things. First, pay down debt. Maybe I hold some properties and let the rents do the work. Maybe I sell off a few that have done their job and use the proceeds to pay down the others. Second, I turn the portfolio into income. That goal I set back at the Bucks party, completely sober at that stage, of course, $200,000 to $250,000 a year. So everything I do now is measured against that outcome. I ask myself, does this deal make complete sense and move me closer to that number? Is the cash flow helping or hurting? Am I creating more leverage or just adding complexity? I'm not interested in holding 15 or 20 properties forever. I'd rather build it up than simplify. Sell off what I don't need, hold the best ones, and maybe even own the family home outright. In the words of Braveheart, financial freedom. So that's the full picture. And as you can see, it's been a messy journey. I've bought dodgy apartments, I've made emotional decisions, and I've even watched my dad accidentally buy a house at auction. But as you can see, I didn't give up. And most importantly, learned from those earlier mistakes. Most importantly, I really believe what's kept me going is having a clear goal and then building a structure and awesome team that supports it. My strategy isn't perfect, and there are people out there potentially getting better returns, but this works awesome for me and our clients. It fits my lifestyle, my priorities, and the stage of life that I'm in. So I really hope hearing this will help you plan out your investment strategy. And if you want to avoid some of the mistakes I've made when I started out, check out this next video and be careful taking your dad to an auction. Love your dad. To your success.